A snake bite is usually a death sentence, but for Ish, it was the only thing that kept him alive. While he was unconscious and fighting the venom, a global pandemic wiped out 99% of the human race. When he finally woke up, he wasn't just a survivor, he was one of the last people left on Earth. The story begins with a geologist named Ish who goes into the mountains to take a mineral sample. Suddenly, a snake bites his hand, injecting its venom. Ish screams and tries to grab his cell phone to call for help, but due to the pain, he drops it down a ravine. With no other choice, he sucks out the venom and spits it out. He returns home and drinks some water, but his vision and hearing become blurred. An hour later, Ish is awoken by the sound of a helicopter outside his house and someone knocking at the door, but he can't speak or move. At nightfall, he crawls across the floor to get water while receiving a final message from his mother telling him how much she loves him. A few days later, the snake venom finally leaves his body, and he feels much better. Anxious to see his family, he gets into his car and drives to the city, but he is shocked to find the streets empty. Further down the road, he stops when he sees a body, and upon getting out of the car, he finds many more bodies and abandoned vehicles. Ish doesn't know what's happening until he reads a sign stating that a global pandemic has wiped out almost all humans. Terrified, he returns to his car and turns on the radio. The broadcaster reminds listeners that the virus is highly contagious and lethal, and everyone must stay home. Ish arrives at his parents' house, hoping to see them again, but they have already passed away from the virus. Heartbroken, he buries them in the garden and says goodbye with a kiss on the forehead. He then goes to a nearby church looking for survivors, but only finds hundreds of bodies. He takes a weapon he finds there and drives to a bridge connecting to other cities, but the road is blocked by cars. Ish decides to take another path toward Las Vegas, but that city is also completely deserted. He enters a hotel bar to drown his sorrows in alcohol, but he is startled by voices in the shadows. Two survivors who are immune to the virus, Anne and Milton, emerge. Milton tells him that when the virus arrived, news reports alerted the population, but it was too late. All vaccines were ineffective, and chaos soon broke out. Anne mentions she watched her husband and daughters die over a video call. Milton also shares that his wife died in that hotel. Although they are getting along, Ish mentions he will be leaving soon. Milton tries to convince him to stay, saying they have plenty of food and electricity, but Ish prefers to travel the country. Before leaving, Ish asks Anne to go with him, but she refuses and says goodbye with a kiss. Continuing his journey, Ish finds a stray dog that he adopts and names Lucky. They stop at a library to take all the survival books they can find, and then return to his house to start a new life. A year later, Ish and Lucky are still living in the same place, but the loneliness is causing Ish to lose his mind. One day, he sees smoke coming from the chimney of a nearby house. He drives there immediately and meets Em, who points a gun at him. He tells her he is peaceful, and she invites him in, explaining she just moved there. They get along well, and Ish asks her to live with him for company. She accepts, and they eventually become a couple. Life improves for Ish, and he abandons his thoughts of ending his life. They go to a supermarket for food, create pens for raising animals, and install solar panels. One morning, Ish slips and sprains his ankle, but Em rescues him and heals the injury with remedies. That night, she wakes up crying over photos of her family. A few days later, she discovers she is pregnant. Ish worries because there are no doctors, so he goes to the library to read every book he can find about childbirth and babies. Months later, their small farm begins to provide food, and Ish finishes the solar panels so they can have electricity. One day, Em finds a rat in the basement. Ish tells her not to worry, but suddenly hundreds of rats surround the house. Ish realizes the garbage bags are attracting them and goes outside to burn them, but the army of rats is so large he has to retreat. He realizes he left Lucky outside and opens the door to let him in, but some rats enter the house. He uses a stick to fight them off. By morning, they see that wild cats are eradicating the rats, making them feel safer. A month later, M goes into labor and successfully gives birth to a daughter. M tells Ish she wants to create a community with other survivors so their daughter won't be alone. Once she recovers her strength, she writes their address on a supermarket door, hoping others will find it. 6 years later, Ish is in the forest looking for food and finds an injured lion. He gets out to end its suffering, but is distracted by a little girl running away. He follows her and offers her safety, food, and water. When he returns to his truck, the lioness is gone and the girl has climbed into the back. Back at the house, we discover the couple now has 2 children and another one on the way. They also live with 2 other survivors named George and Maureen. The girl, Evie, refuses to get out of the truck, so Ish lets her stay there for the night. The next morning, Maureen tries to give her food. Evie initially resists, but then begins to trust Maureen. They find a diary and a letter from Evie's mother, explaining that Evie's father was an abusive man and that her mother couldn't protect her because she was ill. The group immediately accepts Evie. A year later, the 3rd child, Joey, is growing up. Everything seems to be going well until an intruder alert goes off. They find 3 survivors, Molly, Ezra, and Jean, who come in peace. Maureen recognizes Ezra as a famous musician, which helps them trust the newcomers. Molly explains they had to leave Oregon because the virus killed the remaining survivors there. M allows them to move into the house next door. That night, George and Maureen start a relationship. The next morning, Molly discovers Jean is pregnant. Years pass, the family grows, and Maureen also has a child. One afternoon, Ish's children can't find Lucky. Ish searches and finds him under a fallen tree, where the dog has passed away. The family holds a funeral to say goodbye. Later, Ish is attacked by a lioness. Evie runs for help, and M shoots the lioness while the others take Ish to their makeshift hospital. Molly, who took a nursing course in college, stabilizes him. Weeks later, Ish can walk again and teaches the young people how to hunt. One day, Maureen discovers the house is out of water. Ezra notices the garden soil is becoming very dry, something that hasn't happened in 17 years. Ish visits the city's water dam and is terrified to find it almost empty. At that moment, a group of survivors led by Charlie and Perry arrives. They offer a bottle of water as a peace offering and say they are traveling the country creating water wells in exchange for fuel. Ish agrees, but feels something is wrong. Charlie and his team use a giant drill to create a well, and everyone is happy until Charlie announces he is staying to live with them. That night, Charlie hurts Evie. When the others find out, they vote to get rid of him. Ish takes a hammer and confronts Charlie. When Charlie refuses to leave, he hits him in the head until he is dead. They throw his body into the forest. Charlie's group is actually happy he's gone because they were his prisoners. Years later, a strain of the original virus hits the community, infecting Joey and others. Molly tries to create an antidote, but many people die. Jean's son also passes away after a confrontation in the mountains. Molly finally creates an effective medicine, but Joey dies because his body couldn't resist the virus. The family holds a ceremony for those they lost. A year later, Ish finds Joey's diary, which contains drawings of a radio to communicate with others. He shares these drawings, and the community builds a radio, eventually contacting a group of 77 survivors living in a stadium. They invite them to join the community. 50 years later, an elderly man gives his hammer to his son, Alex, telling him he will now be the leader. He reminds him that humans come and go, but the Earth remains forever.